Welcome to Beyond Tech, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jackie Slaght, and today I'm joined by a special guest co-host, Dave O'Brien. Dave is a business development manager here at eTech Group, and because he's out in the field every day, talking with clients, touring facilities, and seeing challenges and breakthroughs firsthand, he brings great real-world experience and perspective to this conversation. We're also joined by two of our subject matter experts who work closely with clients in the pharma and biotech space. Sura Hadi, Director of Laboratory Automation and Industrial Robotics, and Pradeep Paul, Director of Engineering focused on intelligence and data solutions. Together, they bring deep insight into where automation is actually delivering value and where organizations still get stuck. And that's exactly what we want to unpack today. Automation in the pharma and biotech is accelerating quickly, mirroring the shifts happening across labs and manufacturing environments everywhere. In a recent article on automate.org, they really captured this momentum. It highlighted how automation now stretches far beyond packaging lines, supporting everything from drug discovery to high-speed inspection and integrated control ecosystems. Technologies like robotics, machine vision, and unified control systems are dramatically boosting precision, consistency, and decision-making. But as we discussed in our prep call, technology alone isn't enough. Validation, data readiness, and organizational maturity ultimately determine whether automation scales or stalls out at proof of concept. So today we are going to dive into all of that with our guests. So thank you guys for being here. And Dave, thank you for agreeing to be my co-host.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jackie. This is exciting. I've worked with both Sura and Pradeep on several projects, so I'm familiar with their talents and so forth. So looking
Talents,
forward
we're
to this.
hitting the
Thanks for
bar
having me.
high.
Yeah, this will be fun. Yeah, so I kind of want to start out broad. The automate.org article really highlighted how pharma automation is expanding far beyond the packaging line and into R&D and QA, into drug discovery, even pharma dispensing. Does that match with both of what you guys are seeing in the field?
I've been in this space for a very long time, almost like 2 decades, and doing high throughput screening back in the day in 2002. And the difference between then and now is like night and day. Automation in pharma is like moving things faster on a line, right? And today you're having conversations with clients that are about fully autonomous experimentation, systems that can design their own next experiment based on the last result, which is unheard of back in the day. And there's a lot of things driving that, and it's a combination that's hitting all at once at the same time, which is great for expanding the field.
What about you, Pradeep? Is it?
Yeah, similar experiences of Sura. My hairline gives away how long I've been in this industry. So when we started, it was all stick-built stainless steel facilities in life sciences. We had monolithic systems like, say, a Rockwell or a Delta V. Now we see that the industry has gone to single use with a lot of OEM provided skids. Brings about is more complexity. It's what we call islands of automation. So you've got a lot of these data sources lying around, and now you have to put all of that together and contextualize it across all of these systems. So in terms of operations, it's not that different, but in terms of data and analytics and contextualization, all that is ratcheted a little bit more than what we had done back in the day. So yeah, it does. So as they talked about in the article, where they're talking about innovation in terms of like vision and packaging lines in life sciences, the analytics portion, it's brought in more technology, more cloud-based solutions, and other systems that previously in OT applications were not available to us, but now it's there and we can benefit out of it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I know pharma and biotech are one of the most heavily regulated industries. So, I mean, that's a huge concern, is the regulation and validation in the industry. How can automation adoption kind of speed that process up rather than, I guess, make it more complicated
Yeah, I
and
think
slow
that's a
it
good
down?
question. A lot of people think that when you hit regulation, it's the thing that slows automation down. You have to take a minute, make sure everything is validated, and validation is hard. It takes time. But when you are in these environments and you need a full audit trail for every single process step, manual documentation just can never scale, right? And we've seen that firsthand, the volume and complexity of what you're tracking in pharma right now in this pharma environment just can't be done reliably by hand. You've got a bunch of humans with human error and human speed, right? So automation helps make that compliance easier and it actually makes it more achievable. So regulators can come in and they're not just accepting automated systems like they were before. They were actually expecting them because they're expecting you to meet that demand, right? To turn that around. And that's quite a big shift.
So, sir, what is like we're seeing robotics coming into play with, especially in the lab environment, but also in manufacturing too, like PD labs and so forth. What does a robot look like actually being used in a lab alongside a technician? You see all this press forward again, like there's a lot of different players, a lot of different platforms out there. What does it look like in practice, and how does it change the role of a scientist
Yeah, that's
or
a
a
good
lab
question. And I
technician,
think
for
that's the thing
example?
that we encountered when robotics was first coming into the lab space is a lot of people just didn't want me to talk to them because they were like, you're going to replace me, right? And it's really not about that. It's expanding the human innovation space. And what we're talking about is, when we were back in the day in 2002 and so forth, when automation wasn't even that spread, we were doing high amounts of discovery, high amounts of different mutations for our screening campaigns. And you're talking about 80,000 variants, right? Are you really going to investigate that as a human one by one in a lab when you've got all these competitors? So automation really opened up that space because now you've got the density to put something on a 384 well plate. Now you have 384 experiments at a time. So it's really that relationship between what a scientist can envision, right? And what a robot can do consistently, robustly, right? Time after time with high accuracy and precision. So it's kind of like what AI is right now. It's meant to be a partner in the space. So back to your question of what does it look like? It looks like a PhD not having to move liquid from one tube to another anymore, right? It's actually putting something in an incubator or in a space that the robot can then rearrange and can make decisions based on the experimentation and analysis that's happening in real time, what that next experiment that it's going to do looks like. So it's really just expanding this space in a way that we haven't thought of. And it goes back to the question of how do you become an AI ready lab, right? You have to be automated first.
And like just to tie it back to the original previous question about validation GMP, you're saying that by harnessing this, it actually makes that.
Absolutely. Now you've got a lot of the documentation in place, and automation starts by making sure that things are, in a controlled process. You've got things in pieces that have SOPs and data that's coming out that's getting captured into an ELN or LIMS system. All that information now is in a digital space, and Pradeep can talk more about this, right? That pulls it in very easily for these regulators. It creates a very easy like documentation package for your audit inspection that before you're just trying to find pieces of paper and where did the technician write this down and where did we last PM this, right? Sorry, Prateep, if you have insight.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah,
No,
Pradeep, you have a thought?
we were talking about automation and how it helps, right? Because automation, then imagine doing something where you're measuring a liquid and then pouring it into, say, a container. If you're going to have a human do that, there's going to be errors every time he does it. But if you have automation, you can be rest assured that with flow meters, with weigh scales, you can accurately do exactly what your target value is or what your weigh is. So this ties into what Sura was saying. If you're going to go and do experiments and you want to pipette out whatever liquid you want, is it going to be consistent? And I'm pretty sure that a robot will do it as reliable as possible. And so that little question in somebody's doubt that, okay, did you put the right amounts and all of those are gone away. So in our case with manufacturing, the way we automate it is so that we can repeat it. Every process is repeatable n number of times and you get the same output. Um, the other question about automation is also now that you have all the data, we can then report. We know that all this data is good and we can report by exception. So QA is not going through a 1,000-page document. They still have to review all of
Got
that,
it.
but it's by exception that they do only deviations. So something which is out of the normal is what they can then target towards and then look at that.
That's a good point. So it sounds really easy. I assume it's not, or maybe it is if you guys are involved. But Can you talk about when you're trying to stand something like this up, like say like a robotic system? What are the challenges that people need to start thinking about with this?
I'm letting Pradeep answer first this time.
Or
No,
Pradeep, yeah,
go.
you can
Lab
go
is
first
not
if you
my
want, Pradeep.
is not my space. So
Yeah, Pradeep's more the
I
data
was
guy. I guess
curious
this
to
is more
know.
robotics.
I'm more of an audience here,
Yeah,
Sura.
I think it goes back to what I was saying before, right? A robot does exactly what you tell it. So you have to make sure that you're being very precise in what you're communicating for these robotic protocols and even the data handling after and the analysis that you're doing. But also, the environments are totally different, right? You need flexibility when you're doing discovery, for example. The assay you're running this month might not even exist 6 months from now. So the system has to be more modular and easier to configure. And that was a new thing that came up in our industry. It used to be that you just put a liquid handler down on a bench and you walk away and you don't move it. Now, what ended up happening was we started thinking, wait, we're spending a lot of money on this instrumentation. Let's make things modular so we can put carts that roll around, that dock and undock, teach points that access by one arm that can be accessed by another arm in another row in another lab, right? And so that really helps because as you move towards scale up, you're flipping those requirements. You need not only like traceability and repeatability and validation, but the technology sometimes has to have a different design philosophy. So if you are married to one, you don't get to expand that space. So the harder challenge is just, how do you look to that and build towards that? So it's really a people mindset and breaking out of that mindset. And scientists, as you know, they're very protective of their methods, right? Until you shadow them, you don't
Yes.
understand that someone is actually, flipping a vial upside down to mix it. And then when you're trying to kind of scale that to a robotic system, you don't have that because it's not written in the SOP anywhere. So it's really important to actually work side by side with those methods and people in the space so that you can make sure that people trust and adopt the system because it's consistently returning the result that they would expect just on a higher scale.
Does change management come into play? Is that something that
Definitely, and
companies
it's
need to think about?
something that's important. For example, we see in the limbs space, they adopt like a limbs vendor,
Yes.
and they don't think about what does that change management look like. And so we're constantly brought in to kind of put these best standards and practices into place so that companies don't suffer that later because they hadn't actually thought about a documented path forward, right?
And like, we're talking about this, all these systems, these assets, these things, for lack of a better term, are all generating data. And that's where Pradeep comes into play. I'm curious on his thoughts here. Like, you have all this data, right? All
Yeah.
these things generating the data. How are organizations using that, Pradeep? Like, I feel like it's just endless.
Yeah, I think
Like, how would they managing that aspect, like versus
so.
just letting it pile up, for example?
Yeah, so first we when we started, we have different systems for different data types. So when you have trends or you say time series, we have what is called a historian, which can handle that kind of data. So typically, historians are extremely efficient in terms of footprint and it can do compression. So nobody cared about how much you put in. A lot of people will say, give me all the data. Let's just put it into historian so that we are compliant at certain point. If somebody wants to know exactly what happened, we can go and then pull it up. So typically, a lot of customers didn't have any restrictions of putting data, storing it in, but then it starts becoming an important as what you want to report out. So that's where our in dashboards or looking at things and getting an idea of, you don't want to overwhelm your operator in terms of giving him all this data in. We do, since now storage is never an issue, we can put in things at least on-prem. We can capture as much as we want. But when we start to display and do analytics, we want to be a little bit more thoughtful of how you display things. When we're talking about HMI systems, we go with the ISA 101 or whatever the high definition module is, where you have grayscale and you have these levels of displays, where your level 1 is more an overview and then you can start going into deeper, so you're not overwhelming everybody. Back in the day, we had P&IDs like piping instrumentation diagrams, and it's all over the place. So you go in and you're just completely overwhelmed. Nowadays, you go in, it's very minimalistic. You have different thought processes of what you want. And so we have come a long way, at least in eTech, in standardizing the best practices and setting all of that up. And then once you've got that, at least from an operator's perspective, and showing them and empowering them with the correct and not getting overwhelmed, then we go into engineering and what do they need for their reports and their analytics. And so we go from outside in. So in the sense that we've got all the data as a good base, but then we ask the engineers, okay, what would be helpful for you to troubleshoot something? And we just pull in all that information only and keep it ready in terms of on-demand reports or predefined reports so that they can quickly go in and do troubleshooting or root cause analysis and things like that, and reporting as well. So yeah, we do try and get all the data as a foundational basis, but then we start going. It's like a pyramid system where the high value points are now
I mean,
filtered
that's
through
awesome to hear, but
to
I
the end
think
user.
something
labs, honestly, they just let it pile up usually. Yeah, because these
It's
liquid
not good.
handlers, every single transfer is logged. The instruments
Yeah.
have run files, the robots tracking every move. So there all this metadata is just sitting in folders and nobody's really, looking at it or trying to get it out for analysis in any way. And so, to Pradeep's point, the labs that are actually doing well are connecting this data back to the decisions they're making. And what we want to do is help alleviate that burden of where is the data, how do we read it, what does it actually impact, and tying it back to their limbs or their ELNs in a structured way. And I think that connection layer is just a lot of what I see. The labs are just underinvested in it and they don't think about it until something related to their ROIs around reliability metrics come up, right?
Yeah, and what I see in the field a lot too is a company will invest in a LIMS system, but they never actually integrate it
Or
properly, and
flex
it
it.
like
These things can do a lot
almost
more,
becomes like
and there's a lot more that they've got like
Mhm.
gaps in, right? And we help patch those gaps as well as show you what more they can do. And a lot of the folks that are working on them aren't really like informatics engineers by training. And so some of the scripts aren't up to the best practices, and some of the ways they're linking them aren't the most efficient. So I think that's, like you said, you're just moving the bottleneck, right? You're increasing throughput, but now you've got a ton of data that nobody's actually looking at in any real fashion.
yes,
I think
makes
Suraj,
sense.
like looking at your lab space, that's just an incredible volume of information. So for us to give context on a manufacturing side, if you're looking at batches, right? Annual number of batches. Maybe you do, say, on a high end, you do 5 batches a month times 12, 60, right? We're just talking about 60 batches. Here you're talking about a well or whatever you spoke about. Sorry, we have like a micro well. You have 100 of these little
Thousands. I
wells.
mean, we can have 400,000 experiments in one batch, what you would call,
So
right? Because we have the densities that can go to
wow.
1536.
Yeah.
Back when we were throwing everything in the kitchen sink at discovery efforts, we were actually running 1536 well plates, 400,000 well plates through these automated workflows.
Imagine the complexity, how much of data, and then is everything relevant, or do you have like some, okay, this passed, so I don't want to what, I don't care about this. How do you, or is validation? Do they care about all that information, or
Well,
what
when
do
you're
they
screening at
normally
that
care about?
density, right, it's usually and this is the thinking that went back in the day when automation was coming up, right? There's the throw everything at it and see if something sticks. So you're just looking for a qualitative yes, no.
Mhm.
That's when you're throwing these big densities at a workflow. And then once you get through
Yeah.
that first filter, then you start looking at like performance assays. So now you're going
Got
from
it.
like 80,000 variants to 4,000
Okay.
variants, right? That is a space now that we can go into more depth because it's not as many important things
Yeah.
that you're like nonsensical things that you might be looking at that you've just trashed in the first wave.
Yeah. Yeah. So information, informatics, if I can call it that, is so crucial for lab, right? So you have so technical because now you're talking about robotics, you're talking about equipment's just designed for the lab. Then you have throw in that amount of information or data, and then you have to analyze it, and then you have to come through. That's why we have the best in e-tech, and we're glad to have the team with
But this
Sura
article is
leads.
great because it covers a lot of
So
these things that I think, a lot of people haven't been thinking of. What do you do with this pileup of data? Have you thought about it? Right? What could we do to get that information out?
yeah, and like the other thing that the article talks about is like regarding integrated ecosystems, I think is the term it uses. So
Mm-hmm.
like you have robotics, machine vision
Mm-hmm.
systems, PLC, SCADA, AI, DCS, whatever it might be. I mean, everything's talking to each other. Oftentimes they're made by different companies. There might be different protocols involved. Like how real world, like in reality, how hard is it to get those systems unified, especially when you talk like legacy
Yeah, welcome to the
systems?
lab automation space where we don't have standards like manufacturing. It's pretty hard. And
Right.
I think people underestimate how hard it is specifically in labs. You've got, like you were saying, liquid handlers, plate readers, sequencers, incubators, different vendors. Every instrument is doing something different, speaking like a different language. And most of them were never designed to share anything with each other. Laboratory automation, this industry is a very protective space. You see manufacturing have a lot more standards and a lot more ways that they can work together. We don't have that. Everyone kind of keeps this IP very close to them, which means that it's really hard to get that information to communicate and play well with others. And we're vendor agnostic at eTech. So, we don't think about this, but a lot of people want you to stay in their own ecosystem. And then you put like a LIMS and maybe an
Yes.
ELN on top and maybe like a scheduling system, and none of them were bought at the same time with integration in mind. So you're kind of, to get them all talking, you actually have to make sure that you find something that works with the workflow first and then kind of map out that data and where it needs to flow and how it needs to connect to those pieces and then integrate everything at once. And that's what you find in labs because they're siloed and different scientists are talking to different salesmen to buy different things. And then they want to kind of bring them together at the end, right? But start with the workflow and then build from there.
Makes sense.
So one of the things you guys have both, Pradeep and Sura, have touched on is really understanding the need to understand the entire process, whether it's for the scientist or if you're on the manufacturing side, just understanding the priorities for each individual involved in the process and making sure their priorities are heard. And then maybe for you, Pradeep, on the data side of making sure the right data is getting to the right person in what they need to, to interpret or use.
Yeah, no, so Sura's team is so experienced. And the good thing is they are scientists themselves. Just look at the team there. They have a biology background. They know exactly what the scientists are going through, so they can relate well. And now they have the IT or the whatever the technology of R&D space, so they can merge both of those needs together. And this is very unique in that perspective. It's not like some IT guy coming in and walking into a lab and trying to figure out how it's going to work. In the same breath, most of us at eTech, at least in the life sciences, we've got a chemical engineering background or a mechanical engineering. So we know the processes and we've been in the industry for a long time that we know what to expect. And so we can cater to or develop solutions based on our expertise in the process side. Although, and you can add the automation too, but we know exactly where things are, your KPIs, your critical process parameters. We know all of that, and so we can guide some of the decisions in terms of solutions based on our expertise in process, in Sura's case, lab itself.
So this is really interesting conversation so far. The thing that I'm thinking about is data contextualization. That always comes up as a challenge, and I think the article talks about that too. Is like this is something that gets thrown around a lot in the industry. The idea of what exactly is data contextualization, whether it's lab, whether it's manufacturing, or even the full chain, if you will. What does it mean to truly contextualize data? I guess, Sarah, let's start with you on the lab side.
Gosh, yeah.
What does that mean? And why does it matter so much for decision making? Because that data, especially in life sciences, that's going to get passed up to manufacturing as part of your tech transfer. So, what does that
Yeah, and this
mean
is
from
a
your
constant
perspective?
challenge that comes up in lab environments because when you're doing these, biochemistry workflows or what you're trying to do, it's not a number that comes up, right? It's a whole story around it. And the story, part of it isn't just the science or the experiment, but what instrument ran it, what state was it in, what's the reagent lot, who initiated the run, and then what study it belongs to. And that's really important because, you have to work on the investigation, right? And what is that and what sense can you make out of it? And you encounter these anomalies, right, that comes up in results and you have to trace that back. And it ends up being something silly like a reagent lot was, almost to its expiration date and somebody didn't check that. And if you look at, biological systems are heavily impacted by the environment that they're in. And if something is trending down for a reason. It's usually related to something like this in the environment that's not really at its full capacity. So without having that connection, that analysis, you'd have been guessing for days what's happening with this data. Why is it trending lower when it should be, here? And that comes up a lot. And labs can answer that question of why did this happen quickly if they're invested in capturing that context, not just the results, right?
And Pradeep, how about from the manufacturing side?
Yeah. So say I'll give you a simple context. So if you say, so typically when we looked at historian, you're going to pull up a trend, right? A trend is a time series data. So say for example, you see, and usually we have protocols or naming conventions. A TT is the temperature transmitter. So you say TT 000, right? And you say, okay, I want to check this out. And I pull this into a trend and it says it reads 20. You don't know what context there is to it. Is it part of a bioreactor? Is it part of a storage unit? If it's part of a storage unit or a storage tank, it makes sense. If it's part of a refrigerator and it's 20 degrees, maybe it's something's wrong with it, right? So that is what we talk about in terms of contextualization, in terms of if you see something, you need to know which asset or which unit it belongs to, which line it belongs to, time periods. Is there was there a batch run during that time period? Was it between the limits of what it needs to be? So that is where we try to, and with manufacturing, there are so many different systems, right? You have your SCADA system, which is your HMI, you have an MES system, you have a historian. All of them are sharing information and all of them need some kind of context. And typically you try to add this context at the end when you're doing reports. But then if you want to troubleshoot it, you still need context. So there lies the challenge where you always need some kind of metadata or some kind of thing which can guide you through as to, okay, am I seeing something which is out of place or is it normal? And so we start with that and then you build upon it and say, okay, how do I make it such that a report can, when you're showing something in a report, people have context to what that particular trend is. It was run during this batch, it was for this product, it was for this lot number. And so all of that is what data contextualization means. And this helps, ultimately, it helps the release of a batch so that some QA or a QC person knows when he sees something and reviews it, he knows what the context behind why it is behaving in a certain way.
Gotcha. I think that's an important point. There's always like an end event that happens
Right.
that this all leads to. I'm going to bring up the hottest, most talked about topic right now by far.
Let me guess, is it AI?
This has been, everybody is talking about this. It's a really interesting time. Of course, the topic is AI. I think there's been, it's kind of been woven in throughout this conversation a little bit, but I'm curious, both of your perspectives here. Let's start with Sura. Regarding quality discovery operations across the board, across the industry, where do you see, at least this is being recorded March in 2020, where do you see AI delivering the most immediate practical value in pharma automation today? Is there a sense of is it more hype than reality, or are there real use cases? Where do you see this going, again, as of today? Because I feel like it changes.
Yeah, I mean, things are trendy for a reason, right? But there's always something about them that's useful. And what I think is, the stuff that's actually working right now is when the problem is really well defined and there's real data behind it, like predictive maintenance, right? That on equipment with years of run history, that's something tangible. That's something that you can, really feed into a model. And when you're looking at that, that's where you can actually look at, how can I get genuine time savings here? And the same thing was regulatory documents or adverse event data, like Pradeep was saying. I think anything, though, that gets the system without the human, right, to make a judgment call in kind of a situation that's not clearly defined or doesn't have the right parameters, that's where you have to worry a little bit. But I've seen it be very powerful in those frameworks, especially for regulatory environments that maybe aren't keeping up with the science. Those things are, there's a lot of promising things there, but maybe we're a little earlier, right? I think a lot of people talk about AI and it's, again, one of those partners for you. It's a multiplier. If your data is good and your processes are solid, it makes them better. If they're not, it just kind of speeds up the mess and it gets you more confused, right, than you were in the beginning. Hallucination is a real thing.
Right. Yeah, like for me is an account manager, a lot of client work, communication. There's, without question, there's use cases where it's useful from my perspective of, again, communicating with clients, that aspect. But the question always comes up, where does it fit in a lab environment, in a manufacturing environment, especially in a validated environment? How does AI come in with GMP? There are always questions that come up with that. Pradeep, what's your take on this from the manufacturing side?
Yeah, this reminds me back in 2000. Did you ever hear about the
Mm.
nanotechnology craze?
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah.
was talking about nano, nano, nano. And there was a professor of mine, Professor Bonner. He said, this thing has been there for like 60 years. And now they've just put a word to it called nano and it's now taken off, but I'm going to use it. So he's republishing all his old publications but putting nano in it. So what it reminds me that AI is so broad that like predictive maintenance and all of this has already been there for like 20 years, which it's like ML models, which is called machine learning models or conditioning based monitoring. What I feel because AI is just blown off is because of the LLMs and so-called reason, how it can reason out, which is incredible. And I was thinking of the use case. So there are a lot of use cases in terms of ML, which is being thoroughly vetted out, right? Like predictive maintenance, what Sura said, conditioning based monitoring. You can do analysis on batches. So you can do a golden batch and then you can do real time analytics on the batch. And if it's not exactly trending towards how a golden batch could look, you can give out signals to your process. So all that is done. What I was thinking about is like we have volumes of information in terms of when you do a batch release, it's like 1,000 pages of documents, right? Or an EBR is also so much. Can we use that and feed it into a model and then give out the salient features of exactly, can you chat to it, right? Like QA, for example. The problem I see is with our manufacturing or our life sciences, it's so validated and regulated, and we follow the V model, user requirements, we do functional specs, we do SDSs, software design, we look at the code and we make sure that everything is exactly to requirements, and then we know it's repeatable and there's no deviations. And if there's deviations, we can actually trace through it. Given that, if you tell me or tell a QA person that I have like this black box that I put stuff in and it gives me these incredible results, how are you going to validate that thing? Or do you ever, you also
Beware the
do you
black box,
need to
though. That
validate it
scares
is
a
the
lot of
question.
those
So I
guys.
think, right, right. So I think it's going to be helpful, but it's not going to be, so we can use it in tandem with the other systems. But this is going to say you're going to take a system and you're going to review this 1,000 page document. It takes you like 4 days. Probably you feed it into an AI agent and it'll give out the salient features of it and give it to you in like, say, 5 minutes. Now you know where to go and look for things. So maybe that's one use case. And then, Surya, you talked about this volumes of data in terms of informatics and your lab informatics. Those could be helpful too, because just to identify trends and use the power of the LLMs in different ways, I think those will be, I think, are great use cases. I think we need proof of concepts first, tying to use cases, tying to business outcomes, not just doing things for the sake of doing things, but just doing business outcomes. Can I reduce the load on my QA person who takes 4 days to do something? Can I reduce that to, say, like half an hour? There is a lot of benefits out of that. Then I go in and say, how can I do that? Can I do a proof of concept? Do I need to validate everything? I don't think I need to validate everything. I can use this as a job aid or in tandem. And so we've got I think there's a lot of use cases. We just have to make sure we vet it out and apply some business metrics to it and then come up with a plan and stick to that.
Yeah, I think what you've said throughout the conversation, but really getting your company or facility ready to be able to take advantage of AI, but you can't do that until, as Sura said, without the process, without the data, you're going to end up with a bigger mess. So what piece of advice would you give to a company that's just kind of dipping their toe in automation this year or whenever they would like to start? How do they
I
begin?
mean, for automation in particular, or AI, or in what context?
In automation or I guess either way, but I feel like you probably have to start with automation before you jump
Yeah,
to
I
AI.
think, for automation, I think it's pretty important to think about, what is the workflow that is producing the biggest bottleneck? What are my pain points, right? Like the problem that you're facing. A lot of the organizations that we find reach out to us fall in love with a demo they saw at SLAS or, at another conference or show. And then they kind of go looking for workflows they can throw at it to automate it. And that's a little bit backwards, right? It's almost like fitting something, into a square or round box, a square into a round box. I love using these examples and I never remember the exact way to say it. So I always say, like, when I have these client calls, I want them to start with their most painful, high risk manual process. That's the one that your operations lead, your, directors, that's the one they're losing sleep over. So you solve that and you solve it very well, right? How do I miniaturize it? How do I automate it? What does the process look like? And then what are the tools, right, that I need to build that? That's going to get you this real win. That's the low hanging fruit. And that helps you build the internal credibility for what you went out and accomplished, that you can then get more budget and get more pieces to automate, because the trust then grows from there. So that brings your work and the quality of it and everything else that you're trying to do, especially in a regulated environment. Your compliance team is going to love you, and they're brought in and from day one, right? Instead of at the end when you're looking to make sure you don't get, called up for the mistakes or the gaps that you have. So that's, I think, where I see success. A lot of the automation projects that fail are always the ones that are designed by, engineering and then handed over, to QA as like done. And then QA is like, well, what is this? And how did you get here? And what is the process? And there's no like communication, right? But you have to build it together from the start, and it starts with your pain points.
Absolutely. So in terms of manufacturing, I think we start with how can you be AI ready? You start with first the basics of infrastructure. If you're going to do anything AI related, you will need to make sure that you've got all the networking in place. Invariably, you'll be going out to the cloud for some SaaS-based application. Got to make sure you've got your networks in place, your security in place, cyber security. In manufacturing, we have the S95 model, which does the network segmentation in terms of layers. So in eTech, we do have like an AI ready assessment. So our IT/OT people go in and make sure that it is you're following the best practices in terms of network. Then you layer upon your business outcomes. You can figure out, okay, what do you want? What will be the low hanging fruit that you can have AI solve? Do you have the data sets for it? Do you have the data contextualization for it? And all of those pieces. So I would say an audit would probably be the first scenario or the first step. And within the audit itself, to make sure that you have the infrastructure in terms of IT related infrastructure. And then you have systems in place that can collate all this information and contextualize it. I know we keep on talking about the word contextualizing, but it's important. Even for the AI to have context to give you something in terms of reasonable
No, I
outcomes
love that.
out
And
of
I think that's important for labs too, like the AI ready lab. You hear a lot about that.
it.
And an AI ready lab just doesn't exist. You have to have, all the things we talked about, the integrated instrumentation and then the data standardization and the context around that, because structured data feeds AI, right? But you have those pillars that are important for that. And I posted something on LinkedIn about that before, where there are steps where you can get your lab ready, and you have to make sure that those, the decision layers and the orchestration are all pieces that exist so that you can be successful.
Yeah, I think we may do another episode, sir, just
Oh,
on
goodness.
the AI ready lab.
Nice.
I just looped you into it right now.
Yes. Timely topic. And again, March of 2026. A year from now, this is probably going to sound
It
like
just changes
ancient
and
history.
moves so fast.
It
It's,
does
the
move fast.
conversation's just going to keep going
It really
until we've
does.
got use cases, I think, that are successful.
Yeah.
Well, I think unless Dave, you had anything else, I don't think I had any other topics that I wanted to hit on before closing out. I like to end on some fun questions that just kind of hopefully wrap everything up. So I guess before I jump into those, did you have anything else that you wanted to hit on, or any other questions before we move on?
No, I think we covered a lot here.
Yeah, it was a great
It's
conversation.
really, really interesting. There's a lot of moving parts in the industry right now. I think this was a really interesting conversation.
Are we going to keep hazing
Pradeep
our
and Sura.
BDMs with
I always learn a
surprise
lot.
co-host? I love this.
I hope so. Dave's the brave one.
No, this
Agreed
has
to do
been
it
this
first.
has been a blast. I've enjoyed this. I've always wondered what it was like to host a like a morning drive sports talk radio show. It's not quite that, but it's still a lot of fun. This has been good.
I think it was really insightful, and as Dave said, I always enjoy talking to really anybody in our organization. I always learn so much, so it's always very helpful.
Deep answer first this time.
Yeah.
If you had to explain system integration to a 5-year-old, how would you describe it?
Yeah.
Dave, you might be able to answer this one too.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were prepped, but
It is like you get asked this a lot, just like, what do you do for work? And it's like, trying
yes,
to explain that.
I
It's someone who's not familiar. Like, I always go back to the show How It's Made, because like
Hmm.
I feel like that's in like just in TV culture, that's been like the most exposure that
yeah,
manufacturing automation has gotten. I usually say, like, how there's robots that put things together in the world. Everyone's seen a robot. It's like there's software behind that. The eyes of that robot. The robot has a set of eyes on it. If you're explaining it to a 5-year-old, like a set of goofy eyes, and those eyes need to be able to see where it's going and figure out what block to pick up, what Lego piece to pick up to put it somewhere else. System integration is about helping those eyes see what they need to see so the
Ooh,
robot
that's
can do its
good.
job.
I
That might
think
be too
That's
complex
Wow.
for
good.
a 5-year-old, I'm not sure. But
depends on the 5-year-old, I think.
you weave in their favorite toy, like how their toy is constructed, that can always help.
What about you, Pradeep?
For me, I say to a 5-year-old, I'll say, like, you know how and I go to my friend's place and he's got all this home automation. For my kid, my 4-year-old loves to go in and say, okay, Google, turn the light off. And it'll do that or dim it or something. So I like to say this is Google in a small little, a pod. How does it know where your light is and how to turn it off? It's two different systems altogether. One is Google, which has no awareness, but somehow it knows how to turn the light off. So that's what we try to do. We try to kind of put these systems together to make it easier on the end user. If I can,
That's a
That's
good
cute, though.
explanation too.
I think, for my kid at least, they've got the iPad that they're trying to steal from you, the iPhone that they're trying to steal from you, and then the TV, which I don't think I watched TV since she was born. So I would say, like, these things, we're trying to make them best friends. And that's really what it's all about, is that when something happens to one of them, all the others know about it, and they can help, kind of like how you and your friends are trying to play nice together and, work well together. That's what these systems work.
And it doesn't
Right,
always
right.
happen with
It takes a
kids.
lot of patience and usually a lot of, candy or something. Bad parenting.
No, candy is always a good bribe.
Yep, works in my household.
All right, I have one more question. If you could automate one tedious part of your job, what would it be?
Can we get AI or somebody to automate, like, setting up meetings across different time zones? Like, e-tech is very international, and trying to get everyone from different and trying to find a gap in there, that's really hard.
That is very challenging, and it feels like something that AI should be able to do. So whoever
Write
needs
a
to
little
figure
bit of
that out.
code.
do the
Pradeep, let's
proof.
take 10 minutes and figure this out.
to be honest, like, we've been using a lot of AI in certain brainstorming, trying to come up with ideas in terms of code itself. And it feels like it's doing an incredible job with programming. Incredible. So things that we have done, what we would have thought to do, would have taken like 4 days or maybe something amount. It gets us there in a quick bit. But it's always prompting, right? You need to put the right prompts in, and it gives you all that. So I feel like if we use it well in daily life, we get very, very productive, and we can
Agree.
take on more. Not that I want more work, but I feel like we could be very
More
productive.
time for podcasting.
Right. Or I can do the work, whatever I do in half an hour, and spend the other hour doing whatever. What is it, golf or pickleball or do all those things. So, but yeah, I think it makes us more productive. It's not gonna, I don't feel it's gonna replace anything, but we can take on more projects, we have more bandwidth.
Yep. Dave, do you have an answer or
So we're like, as in the sales client management side, we're actively using AI every day, trying to come up with use cases. Pradeep talked about the prompting. I think that's really important. You got to work with it every day to know
Yeah.
like how to talk to an AI. It sounds kind of weird, but like the way you prompt things and the way you give it direction matters, and just experimenting. So I think for me, the one task, if I could automate, would be just inbox management. We get so many emails, you're CC'd on so many things. Outlook is just it's this never-ending stream of data, really, that we're trying to manage as a human, being able to better manage that, so people aren't waiting for a response from you, or what are the things I need to react to, what are the things that are I don't need to react to for a couple weeks. Managing that constant inflow of information in the inbox, I think, is something that would be nice to automate. And based on the experimentation that we're doing with AI right now, of just helping our process, I'm very confident that if we did this again a year from now, there's probably a well-developed use case to do that. So it's pretty exciting.
Yes, I would agree. I feel like we're pretty close to that, but I also agree with you. The management of email and meetings is very challenging, and I have been called out multiple times for being bad at responding to somebody for something. So yes, very real problems here right now. But I don't think I have any additional questions. I feel like I usually end on what you would like to see on future episodes of Beyond Tech, but I feel like we kind of hit on that already for a few additional ideas. So I'm going to take notes and probably be calling all of you back for additional episodes. But I want to thank you guys for your time today. I thought this was a great conversation, and I hope it wasn't too much work on any of your ends. I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you, Jackie. Yeah,
Likewise.
this was great.